Hello, everybody. Welcome to a special episode of the KPC Podcast. I'm Karsan Turner, and I am joined with Jack Bergeson. If you want to say hello.
Hi, it's good to be on.
And Jack is running for Kansas governor for the Democratic Party. And you've probably, maybe you don't recognize the name, but you definitely recognize his story. You've been covered on NPR. You've been on Jimmy Kimmel, right?
Yeah, that was last August about.
Okay, yeah. Because you're 17, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and running for governor because Kansas has very strict laws in order to vote, but in terms of running for governor, there are no laws.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up something even more absurd.
Yeah.
This is something that honestly, maybe has worked out in terms of. I honestly, when I first got in, I knew I wanted to get involved in politics. I knew I wanted to run for office. I actually had hoped to be able to run for state legislature first. But in the state of Kansas, you actually do have to be a qualified voter to be able to run for the state house.
Okay.
But not for the statewide executive offices, governor, secretary of state, so on. So I decided I'd do something that was maybe more out there, but would have the same effect I'm hoping. Because really, one of the first reasons I got into this because I was seeing a lot of apathy in politics. I got into the race before Donald Trump was elected, and we pretty much were pretty sure the next president was going to be either Hillary Clinton, maybe Bernie, or maybe Cruz.
Yeah.
We really couldn't fathom the idea of President Trump.
Right.
But I was seeing a lot of apathy. Even though Bernie and Trump were getting more people riled up than we had seen previously, I was still like, I don't know. I think on some levels, yes, among the people that were more inclined to do that anyway.
Yeah.
But among just people in general, I think I was like, I'm going to do something. And I really have seen it, not just in my circles, people I've talked to, just throughout the state, they have become more involved because of this.
Yeah,
so even if I don't get
absolutely.
anywhere near the nomination in August, I will have done something great for my state and great for the United States, hopefully. And hopefully this is continued on. This is not about me. This is about getting the next generation of voters and people engaged in politics, because politics ultimately, if you don't control it, someone else will.
Yeah.
And so I think if we're in control, we can put policy in a positive direction, regardless of party.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm all for you in terms of kind of getting rid of the whole stigma of both parties. The biggest thing our show emphasizes is taking a look at both sides, understanding where they come from. Don't have to agree, but don't have to demonize as well. But you also kind of, I noticed a lot of the things that came up in your article. You were saying, or in articles about you, you were very anti-establishment. You're a fan of Sanders and what's his name, Jesse Ventura, his show that I watch sometimes. So you kind of are the hipster of breaking the establishment. You said it was before Trump was running.
He was running.
He was running, but before he was predicted to win.
Yep. Although, one thing, that's when I got into the race. But by the time I was being picked up by the media, Trump was president.
Oh, okay.
So, I had formed my committee. I had started fundraising for the ballot fee, all under the ground. But Camp Ben, I just really hadn't been picked up by the media. That was sort of all. I mean, that all happened very quickly. I got a contact from the Hutchinson News. I remember it was the night before I was supposed to fly out with my family to Tennessee. And I'm like, so I all of a sudden had to write this email and I had to finish up writing policy. I mean, I was kind of taking it leisurely. Then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, this could be big. So I finished all that up before. I didn't get much sleep. I had to get up early to get on the plane. Then I was talking to her, the interviewer, or not the interviewer, but the journalist from the Hutchinson News. I was talking to her, a couple of times throughout the trip. And then by the time I got home, that had been published, and not long after, I was getting calls from the Eagle, the Kansas City Star, and then I went from there to national papers such as the Wall Street Journal, and then it catapulted into the Kimmel appearance. It was a very quick rise, but then I've seen some steady interest, which is really what I wanted to see. I was actually, funny story, a couple of weeks ago or a month ago, I was supposed to be on a CNN show, Michael Smerenkosh. And then I was supposed to do that interview in Kansas City in the morning and then drive to Lawrence for a forum being held by Douglas County Democrats. I had left town fairly early, about 5 or 6, and by the time we had passed Emporia, I got a phone call from the producer of the show saying, the firing of Andrew McCabe was more important and they were bumping my show. At least I had another reason to be going up to northern Kansas for the forum. So, but I was hours early. So we had a long breakfast in Lawrence and then did the forum. And it was it was just annoying. And I mean, I love, because I wanted that constant, the constant exposure of my ideas. It's not about having my face out there. I see that as a byproduct and necessary evil.
Right.
But I want those ideas out there as much as possible, especially, on, something more like establishment media when those voices aren't often heard.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was there was an interesting story. I was listening to a liberal podcast, and it was saying Ed Schultz. He was a former MSNBC host.
Mm-hmm.
He was in Vermont the night Bernie Sanders was announcing for president, and he was there covering. He was going to cover it live. He got a phone call from his producer 5 minutes to air that he was not to cover the Bernie Sanders announcement. Yeah. I think he did it anyway, and I have a lot of respect. I have a lot of respect for Ed Schultz for that. But I think we have to see that the mainstream media does not want those ideas out there, and when they give you the chance, I take it. And so I was a little bummed out by that, but I've gotten a lot of exposure through them, and people that less likely would have been drawn to anti-establishment politics have been drawn in by this campaign.
Yeah.
So I think I'm grateful for that, because I think as we see a growth of anti-establishment and we really start to have the people take over politics again, we will see great things. That's why the 60s were such a great time because, ultimately, although the politicians were more establishment, Kennedy was, even though a great statesman, was establishment, his family was Boston politics. Johnson was establishment. Mm-hmm. But they both felt public pressure to fight for civil rights, to fight for the voting rights, especially Johnson. The Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, although he ultimately didn't cave to the stuff about the Vietnam War, which I think was, had he given in to the protest, I think that would have been a lot better for Johnson, because the war we found out was not really worth it in the end.
Yeah.
But I think we can see that same energy, I think if we have that same energy today, which I think this is the first step of that, and really reforming our government for the 21st century.
Well, the first thing that kind of stuck to me, talking about the mainstream media and just how kind of corrosive it is, because I was watching a Jesse Ventura interview. He was debating with Gavin McInnes. I don't know if you know who he is, but they both, obviously they were disagreeing on almost everything, but then it came to pharmaceuticals, and they both know people who are told that they cannot critique it on mainstream media or else they'll be fired. And it was the first time they both were like, we totally agree on this, but now on to this, and then they started arguing again. But it's really crazy how anti-established politics is really taken off. I mean, people are tuning into things like independent news media, whether I think it's a good and bad thing. But one thing I like about it more is that people are branding themselves. So it's like I know Ben Shapiro is really popular. So the Ben Shapiro show, if Ben Shapiro messes up, they go, oh, Ben Shapiro is, we're not going to listen to him. But if, Jake Tapper messes up on CNN, they go, CNN messed up, but we don't know who did it. They can pick up their mistakes, but if someone independent messes up, they can almost lose their business. Yeah.
So I think, one thing that I do want to bring up, and I think this is one thing how the dialogue in the country has moved so right wing. I'm going to use Ben Shapiro as an example.
Yeah. He's a very popular person.
Well, I found out a couple weeks ago that he is getting a radio show contract on AM radio. And right-wing talk radio, political talk radio, has almost been dominated exclusively by right-wing.
Yeah.
Limbaugh, Hannity, what's that one guy's name? I can't remember. All those figures. The only major liberal talk radio host is Tom Hartman, and he's off the air now because he's just retired. So, and I think this shows you have to watch out who owns the airwaves, because not a lot of people listen to AM radio. But I think about the rich people who own them and who own the media stations think people still listen to it, and they view it as a valuable way to get those ideas out there, and they view Ben Shapiro as the next Limbaugh. I don't think he'll be as popular simply less people listen to AM radio. Yeah. But I think it's the same pervasive idea. If equal time, I don't know, it's private airwaves, it's not I don't think you can apply public time to radio, but I think you should be able to. This isn't part of my platform. I just believe it, that there's so much right-wing radio, it's diluting that, especially a lot of people don't have time to watch TV or read news. They're in their car, they're listening, that's the one time they get to listen to the news. And if all they're getting is Limbaugh or Shapiro, they're not going to get a fair perspective. So I think we have to I think more liberals should be trying to get contacts with AM radio just to balance out the scales. And I would listen. Absolutely. I'm actually quite a fan of political talk radio, but I can't find any I'd listen to that's not online. Disagreeing is different, because there's a lot of pundits and stuff I listen to that I disagree with.
Yeah.
But I can have, someone like Limbaugh or Shapiro. I don't believe they're honest actors. I think they're in it for the money, especially Limbaugh and probably Shapiro. I don't have a lot of respect for. I get he's popular. I feel like I'm treading on dangerous waters, talking bad mouthing him. But you know what? I don't care.
Yeah.
I think he's dangerous. The things he said about immigrants and stuff like that. I think that's one issue of the right wing platform, not the Republican platform, because there are some Republicans who disagree with this.
Sure, absolutely.
Most Republican voters, most politicians and the Republicans in power. If you try to defame immigrants, you are going to. I mean, we've seen this especially since the rise of President Trump. We've seen more people. We've seen more anti-immigrant violence, or even minority. Even if you're U.S. citizens, you've seen against minority U.S. citizens, which is troubling. Yeah. So we really have to show that. I think we have to get those, especially the ones that are citizens, we have to get them voting and shown there is a better way we can fight back against this. And I think the progressive way, making sure, I think a lot of this is class struggle. While those at the 1% are making more money, those in the working and middle classes are struggling. So if we implement a progressive policy platform where everyone is making living wage, where everyone has access to Medicare, I think you will see less. You will see less race tension because people use race as a scapegoat. Saying, look at all those, X racial group.
Sure.
Look, they're the freeloaders. But that won't happen is if everyone has access to healthcare, everyone is making a decent wage, there are better schools because they're like more. I mean, you will have those vile racists out there, but you will have less people who just view that in their mind. You will have less people who are just afraid of. I think you will see more racial unity. I think class warfare is parallel to race to race discrimination. I think if you have more equality at the social level, you will have it again at the race level. I mean, it will never be completely. You can never completely get away with completely into racism, but I think that's a major step we can make.
Interesting. Let's see. So I guess, one thing I did want to talk about, this has absolutely nothing to do with politics, but I was looking at your Twitter and I saw your first campaign ad and you were in Spectrum Music and you were, do you know what ad I'm talking about? It's like your first campaign ad and there's shots of you walking in Spectrum Music. Did you buy anything that day?
Not that day, actually. I had left my wallet at home, but I've spent quite a bit of money in there before, so I didn't feel too bad about it.
Well, the funny thing, because my sister, she is actually dating the owner of Spectrum.
Oh, that's
so
fun.
I go in there all the time and so what type of music do you listen to? I feel obligated to ask that now. What type of records do you buy?
Well, speaking of my music taste, is very interesting. For me, I like classic country, anything from the 60s through the early 90s, really.
Okay.
And then, classic rock and pop, really 60s through the 80s, early 90s, and then some more modern stuff, but it's more indie stuff. If I'm thinking of anything modern, and like modern stuff that's on the radio, I can't stand any radio station that plays anything after 1994.
Right.
I want to bleed my ears out. I'm quite the REO Speedwagon fanboy, huge into ABBA, or I was at one point. I still kind of am. Jimmy Buffett, that's my kind of stuff. And then you got trying to think of all my stuff. I'm just going through all my records in my head, and I've got so many. I mean, tons of them. And music is something great because it's therapeutic to me.
Absolutely.
It takes you to a different place, and you can forget everything else, everything bad, everything good about it. Or you could just sit there and just zone out, which is great. And I think, with owning music, with owning the physical copy, it really takes you back to the place of the time when that music was a thing.
Yeah.
It's not the same as having it on your phone, whatever. Yeah. It's like actually going out, putting it on and playing it. It has an experience all its own. And then the loud stereo sound. I got to tell you, that sounds great. Yeah. I have it in my room. No one else is home. Goes as loud as I want it to go.
See, I've noticed that if I pick out a record, I'm going to listen to the entire thing. And not only that, but I'm going to sit down and enjoy what I'm listening to. But if I'm doing homework here and I have a Spotify tab opened and I begin an album, 5 minutes in, I'm like, all right, I need something else. So even if it's the same album.
Yeah, I have that exact. I have some albums that if I'm on my phone, I will not listen to the whole thing. But I like the album. Yeah. But if I have the album out, I will listen to it 3 times.
Yeah.
3 times without stopping. I'll flip it over, and just keep playing the same album over and over again. Yeah. I have a few albums like that, actually. And I think that really just shows that if you enjoy it the way it was intended to be enjoyed, it's better that way.
Yeah.
Ultimately, when you can't travel with it, but and funny story actually, how I got into collecting physical music. When I bought my car, actually, about the time I got started my campaign officially, the guy who sold it to me, I actually met him once. I didn't meet him the day I got the car, but whatever, I got it. I went to go pick it up from my grandparents' house after it'd been in the shop for about a week, and looked in the glove box. There wasn't much in it, but the only thing in there was an old REO Speedwagon tape, the album Wheels Are Turning from 1984. I'm like, and then I had known some of their music. I didn't know any of their albums, and I just like read like the label. I'm like, I know some of these songs. And when I was first starting to learn to drive, I was kind of scared about doing anything besides like turning the radio or anything.
Yeah.
So for a while, I played that album straight through about so many times because I didn't want to mess with the radio. Then I got to the point I learned how to set my presets, and I didn't. But I've been through about 2 copies of that album because I went through that first copy really quickly. Yeah. But I mean, used copies and old tapes, they just wear out quicker. That's kind of annoying about it.
Yeah.
You buy a new copy, you use it 4 times, and I don't want to work anymore. No, that's always fun. But I think that's my whole view on music there.
Yeah, I totally agree because I do stuff with the KU radio station KJHK, and since 90% of my day is political stuff, some days it's a great day, other days you're like, oh my God, can it end? But when I always know that at the end of the day when I go and listen to music or I'm writing about music, it's just it's therapeutic, like you described. I totally get you.
Yep.
What are some modern artists that you're into?
Okay. One of the only I don't listen to as much as I used to, but I will say that I was into for a very long time was Hank Green and the Perfect Strangers. Okay. They all have one album that funny story, me and my grandma were looking just to take a trip together anyway. So we were thinking about going to Chicago, and I found out they were going to be playing in Chicago. So I talked to her about it. We found really cheap plane tickets for about $170 each. So we decided to go spend a night in Chicago. We flew out one more Saturday morning, got home Sunday morning. I think we were there not very long. But I think that was one of my favorite concert experiences. We were in Chicago. We did that whole trip's a funny story. But whatever, we got there, and it was in a sweaty concert hall north of Wrigley Field, and it was beautiful. It was like you were right up there. Not like a huge arena where you need a magnifying glass to see the singer. Like he was right there. Like, and then I actually saw him again a year later in Lawrence. I cannot remember the name. It was on Mass Street.
Granada?
No, it wasn't the Granada.
Bottleneck?
No.
That's the only
I know,
one
but there's another one.
Okay.
It's there and whatever. Maybe it is the Granada. I don't know, but it was this really cool theater downtown Lawrence on Mass, and I got closer that time. I got there earlier. I was like right up front that show.
Yeah.
Like in Chicago, we had been busy all day. We were running around taking the L everywhere. So we kind of that was cold. We both had left our coats in the hotel. We stayed at the O'Hare Hilton. We had put our bag in with the porter there at the hotel. We left our coats in our bag. Mm-hmm. So but we thought, it'll be nice. Like it was like 65 that day in Wichita when he left town. Yeah, it was cold and windy in Chicago. We regretted that. I think my grandma had to buy a coat or something because it was so cold. But,
yeah,
I mean that was a fun trip. I think, and I love traveling across this country because I think seeing it for what it is, seeing the big cities, and I also love I love towns like Lawrence and Madison, Wisconsin that are liberal college towns. I gotta say that's one of my favorite parts of the country to go visit. Mm-hmm. And because even in a state like Kansas or to a lesser extent Wisconsin, out of this vast conservative, you get a more modern idea within the state. So I think it's really great to go see. What the next generation's bringing up, and that's why I love coming to Lawrence.
Yeah. Ever since you've started running, have you been able to travel across the country? Has your campaign warranted you to go to different states, or do you stay within Kansas? Or
okay, this is actually this leads right into something I didn't think I'd get to talk about today.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
I don't know if you've seen this clip. In February, I was on the Soledad O'Brien show. It's a syndicated show nationally.
Okay.
Taped in Washington, D.C. They flew me and Republican candidate Tyler Ruzick out. Mm-hmm. He lives up in Kansas City, but whatever. Mm-hmm. So it was a Monday morning. I was actually eating lunch in school, so I could answer a phone call, which I'm so glad they called when they did.
Yeah.
They called me about 12:20, and they said, okay, said, hey, we'd love to have you on this Wednesday. Okay, it's Monday. Think about it.
Yeah.
So, and they had to get in touch with my mom, so I gave them my mom's phone number, whatever. And so throughout that whole day, it was very stressful because I was trying to figure out, okay, what exactly is going on and what's happening. It was very stressful. And so that allowed me, but then by Monday night, they had us our tickets and everything, and we had planned out. We didn't have to pay for anything, paid for the hotel, paid for the plane tickets. It was all paid for. And so we actually got in. My mom decided she had never been to Washington before. And so she had made the decision that we would spend the whole day Wednesday there. Filming was on Thursday. So we got into Washington about 2:00. We went to the hotel, and we went around, and we she wanted to see the Lincoln Memorial and the Vietnam Memorial and all that kind of stuff. Just in the South Lawn of the White House. We went by all that because she had never been at all to D.C. I spent a week there the summer before. So then after that, we actually went over to George Washington University, where I have a friend, and actually this leads into my campaign because she, her name is Allison Gentry. She has done a lot of work for me. She's helped design my website, helped me with a lot of communications related stuff, and she's currently designing my campaign pamphlet right now.
Okay,
so by the time, sooner or later, that should be out, and by the next time we have a big campaign event, we should be able to be displaying those. I'm very excited to have those printed. Yeah. And then the next day it was filming. I mean, it felt like it was like a studio. They put makeup on you.
Yeah.
Backstage room, all that kind of stuff. Then you walk out on stage. I mean, it was like, you sit down right in front of the host. Met her. We all got pictures with her after the taping. And she asked. And one thing I really do like about that interview is she gave very substantive questions. It wasn't. And I've been at some interviews where obviously they were at it for more of, the novelty aspect, but she was at it for the policy. She was very good about that, and I have a lot of respect for her for that. And it made it worth going out to Washington for. Also, one thing, just not relating to that we had the day before, is that the same week we were out there was the same week they had released the Obama's presidential portraits in the Smithsonian Museum. And so I was like, "Oh, can we go in there?" She didn't know that they were coming out yet. So we walked in there and we just saw the big Michelle Obama painting, and she's like, "Oh, those are out this week." So we got pictures, and we actually went up to the presidential gallery and saw the one of President Obama. And then we saw the whole museum is beautiful. Like if anyone listening to this goes to DC, that is the one museum I recommend, the National Art Museum. I mean, it's free to get into, and it's a lot of art, and it's not, and it's just it is a beautiful building too. So it's very worth the time to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you get you mentioned this earlier, how luckily you were having lunch whenever you got a phone call. Are you able to use your phone in class if you say hey, I might be changing the state of Kansas forever. Can I please have my phone in class? Do you get any special things like that?
No, there's been a couple that day, I think included. I had to leave to go to the bathroom to make a phone call.
Yeah.
I've had to do that a couple times, but not in class. But if I need to, I can get out. And I can if I have to. And I think that day was really bizarre. But not really. Sometimes if I'm not doing what I'm supposed to, sometimes I'll occasionally work on some campaign stuff in class. But people have their computers out, but I don't usually. But sometimes if it's a slow day and I think I got it under control, maybe, but I don't try. I try not to do that.
Yeah. What do your teachers and other students, do they know about your campaign run? And if so, what do they think about it?
Oh, everyone. I go to a small school, so everyone knows.
You go to independent?
Yep. Yeah, 150 kids in the high school. My class is 35.
Wow. That is
35, yeah. We had 40 at one point, but when I was in middle school, when I moved there I transferred in 6th grade. But yeah, everyone I've talked to is incredibly supportive. All my classmates are incredibly supportive. They're getting registered to vote for August in the primaries. Every teacher I talk to is either excited or at the very least they're charmed by it, but some of them are actually really excited by it. So I think it's proving its point, I think.
That's good. Oh man, I had a question, but I think I might have just completely forgot it. What was I gonna ask? I don't know. I don't know what I was gonna ask, but I'll ask this question instead. What is your strongest pillar in terms of policy that you want to push the hardest? Or which issue means the most to you?
One issue that I think that I'm not going to say is the most important, but I'm going to say makes me the biggest difference between me and the other Democrats that I really haven't heard them talking about much. Is drug reform. That was been my number one issue from day one. Kansas is one of the few states without legal even medical marijuana. Which means we're putting people in jail for using medicine.
Right.
That is insane. At the absolute bare minimum, we need to decriminalize or legalize medical use. But ultimately, if we do what like states like Colorado and Washington have done, legalize it for recreational use, tax and regulate it. Here's what we're going to get. We're going to get tax revenue. Which if we set up tax revenue, Colorado, I think it's very similar to the Alaska, the oil, what do they call that? The kickback. I know in Alaska, each citizen gets about $1,000 in oil kickbacks from the oil industry provided by the state. And I know in Colorado, I think each person gets. I know there's some tax relief that I know that there is a check sent out from the excess of the marijuana tax that isn't used in the government. In Kansas, though, I think most of the money would go to education because of how severely underfunded it is. We could just use it for education, but also use it for drug rehabilitation.
I was going to ask, wasn't there I read that there was a new bill passed for education, but they miscalculated the numbers.
Yeah.
There's like do you know anything about that?
I know about the bill, and they're going to have to go back. That is not sufficient. And that's why I'm proposing this is one of my means of doing that, of making it so we can have at least another funding source for education, but also some of the revenue I would want to go to drug rehabilitation. So people that need, a lot of people that need that the most are people that can't afford rehab. So if we subsidize rehab, at least for the lower income people, we can have, we can legalize marijuana, but we can have people getting treatment for addiction to hard drugs, so we get those people off the street and the help they need. And also, we'll look at decriminalizing some hard drugs. Not legalized, but decriminalized. If we do that, people will be less afraid to come to stand up and say, "Okay, I need treatment." Because a lot of people fear that if they come up now, they're going to be sent to jail. And take away from their families. But instead, if we say, "Okay, there's no penalty. It's not legal. You really shouldn't have it, but we're not going to send you to jail if you have it.
We'll fine you, but not.
We're not going to send you to jail." So if we do that, people will not be afraid to come up and say and get their subsidized rehab. And I think honestly, that's the best way to fix the drug price. And also, this also ties into the opioid crisis. Because a lot of the things, some of the things that there's an overlap between medical marijuana and some opiates. So if we legalize medical marijuana, that could help get some people off addictive opiates.
Interesting.
So I think that is another thing we have to look at.
Nice. I had no idea that the correlation between using marijuana. I knew about medical marijuana, but I didn't know it could wean people off of the opioid crisis. But
it wouldn't completely, but it could. It would be probably a minority of people who are on opiates, but it would be probably a decent chunk.
Okay. What has been the most difficult thing about starting your campaign? What's been the hardest part? Because you've got to balance school, running a whole campaign, and then I assume you work, or unless the campaign doubles as your work. What's the hardest part?
Well, I work more in the summer, and who knows how much time I'll have to work this summer. But this is always a question I get, and it's always hard to think about because it's never really hard for me because ultimately I'm doing this for the people of Kansas. And so, as much as it takes away from some of my personal time and it takes away from time I would be doing something else I liked, ultimately I enjoy it. So it's really not, sometimes it gets stressful, but it's not really like I hate doing this. It doesn't feel like work. It feels like I'm doing this. It's fun. So ultimately when you're trying to serve the people of your state and you have a passion for it, it doesn't feel like work as much as it feels like your duty. But it's not like the duty in terms of like your work or your schoolwork. It's like, this is actually something that will positively affect people's lives, and you have a lot of energy in that, and that's why I have the motivation to continue doing this all the way through August, and hopefully all the way through November.
Yeah. What originally turned you on to politics?
Well, initially, I remember the first memory I have of anything political was the 2008 presidential election between John McCain and Sarah Palin. I remember the night before the election. I was 7 years old, so I had to go to bed early before we'd find out who was president.
Yeah.
And my whole family was for Obama, and I didn't know much, but I just knew I wanted Obama to win. Mm-hmm. So I wake up the next morning and I asked my mom, who won the election? And she looked at me like I was insane. She's like, of course Obama's going to win. Like, yeah. And then looking back now, that wasn't, of course, like if you look at the election map, it was a landslide. I mean, he won Indiana of all places, including, so I mean, Obama was just a polarizing figure, and I think really then later on, as I was watching Obama, he really wasn't what he said he was. He was a good president. He was not the change we needed. He campaigned on hope and change, but what did we get? We got a watered-down Republican health care bill from the 90s. He continued the drone war. He continued in Iraq. He continued in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. We elected Bob Dole. That is what I'm going to say. Not a bad thing. I don't hate Bob Dole. But we elected Bob Dole. We did not elect a progressive leader, and that's why I had more faith in Bernie Sanders when he was running, because he outlined exactly what he wanted to do: Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage. It was very specific, and it was very, I'm not going to say radical, because in terms of the rest of the world, he's a conservative, and our right wing is out past anything they understand in terms of the rest of the world, Western Europe. So that's one thing, that really I saw, as I was getting really, when I first really started to get into politics, though, was the 2014 midterms. If you want to say the first election because I saw the effect Brownback was having on our state even then. I'm like, the feeling I felt when Paul Davis lost was, much more visceral than the feeling I felt when Donald Trump won. Because Brownback, he had a lot more power to affect this state than Trump ever will. While the national stage may be embarrassed by the president, Brownback made it harder on Kansas children, made it harder on Kansas families, is, just taking, robbing the education and highway funds blind. Yes, he's giving a tax break to the richest, but he's hurting the things that help the lower and middle class. So ultimately, progressive income tax structure, so that was what we need. So let people making, Kansas only has 2 tax brackets now. You know how insane that is? It boggles my mind. It makes no sense. What we need is probably anyone making under $30,000 a year shouldn't pay any taxes. That's my belief. Okay. Probably honestly under 45. But then you know what? If you're making over, money you make over $150,000 a year, that should be taxed at a pretty high, hefty rate. I know the federal government takes some, so we don't want to make it, we want to have people come to Kansas. Yeah. But I think the only reason you're going to get people moving here is if you have good schools, if you have good roads, if you have an overall culture that is supportive and not just, fighting to survive. So I think we really have to build up our public works and make it so people want to move to Kansas, make it a hospitable place to live. And I think we have to do that I think the best way to do that is to implement progressive policy. The one part of progressive policy that I am not fighting for at a state level, though I completely support the policy on a national level, is the Medicare for all policy. Of course, we don't even have Medicaid expansion in Kansas. So I'm first of all fighting for Medicaid expansion first out of the gate, so that we can get health care to those who need it instantly. And then ultimately what I'm also looking at is what I call I just refer to it as the Nevada system. It was tried last year in Nevada. The legislature passed a bill that would have allowed citizens of Nevada to pay into, I think, either Medicare or Medicaid, one of the two. I can't remember which one. It would have allowed people of Nevada to pay into it and offer essentially a public option on the Obamacare exchanges. But the bill passed the state legislature, but it was vetoed by the moderate Republican governor. I mean, that seems like a moderate policy to me, but he vetoed it. So we don't really have a precedent for it, but we do have a precedent for it passing a legislature. So I think it seems like a viable option if a legislature was able to pass it in another state. So I think we can look at it in Kansas as a possibility. Although, first of all, we have to get Medicaid expansion. That's first, but that is part of my healthcare plan.
Okay, and well, another thing on terms of issues, I know you support open carry. You're more lax on gun policy. Is that correct?
Yes, I am still supportive of open carry, though I have changed my policy recently.
Okay, yeah.
I've always been for universal background checks,
Mm-hmm.
something that is something 97% of Americans support, but yet Congress will do nothing.
Yeah.
That boggles my mind.
Well, even Republicans support it too.
Yes, even like if you look
Yeah.
at polls of Republican voters.
Yeah.
Not the ones in D.C., but the voters.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that boggles my mind because you want to keep those voters, right?
Yeah.
You don't want them to defect to the Democrats because of that issue. Which I think many of them, this election cycle, it's a possibility. This is going to be a year that's more prone for Democrats, and if there's a couple issues that the Democrats are able to take away from the Republicans, like guns or, I think guns and marijuana are probably going to be the two biggest issues in this election.
Okay.
I'm seeing the moves from former Speaker Boehner and from Majority Leader Schumer, how it came out that John Boehner is now going to be. He's now on the board of directors for a cannabis company.
Yeah, yeah.
And not long after, Majority Leader Schumer came out and announced that he will be introducing a bill in the Senate that would decriminalize marijuana, which would take it off the Schedule 1 list and all that stuff. Even though it wouldn't fully legalize it throughout the country, it would make sure that those states who have it legalized would have it, and no one would continue to go to jail. So I have a lot of respect for Senator Schumer for that, even though I am not a huge fan of Senator Schumer.
Yeah.
But honestly, it kind of annoys me that he's doing this now because he's doing it when his party is not in power in either chamber or the White House. Mm-hmm. So he's sort of, it's sort of like, okay, we're going to do this when we can't do anything. But if he does the same thing when the Democrats have the majority, I'll have a lot of respect for him. But I still have respect that he's willing to put his name out there on that issue, even though a vast majority of Americans support it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's... And then all the activists on the gun issue, I think if you look at those two things, I'm able to see that those are probably going to be the two biggest issues in this election. But also I think healthcare is going to. I mean, it's been tumultuous since we had to deal with the American Health Care Act that they tried to pass last year. That was a debacle, and getting rid of the individual mandate, which is likely to pretty much collapse the exchanges, the Obamacare exchanges. So I think we have to really. Look at the damage the Republicans are doing, and I hope the Democrats do campaign on at least, hopefully a Medicare for all. Because if I was running for Congress, that would be my number one issue ultimately. Running for the state, so I have a little bit different set of priorities. But not in terms of my mental state. I'm not saying I'm not saying I'm a shifter. I'm saying in terms of where I'm going, what's the most effective thing I can do, and to make my top priority. And I think drug reform makes more sense at a state level. And I think if I was running for Congress, it would be healthcare because that's something that should be the responsibility of the national government. The states should not have to, pick that up because state governments have a lot to pick up anyway. But ultimately, if we need to, we can. But I think those are going to be two biggest issues of this election cycle.
What is your biggest critique of the Democratic Party?
The Democratic Party nationally is. I'm really going to go after the National Party. I mean. Looking at leadership, it does not reflect the base. Pelosi is right wing.
Interesting. I've never heard that take before.
People they try to paint her as a far left liberal. That's what the Republicans try to paint her as. I mean, she has. I'm trying to think of what I know what I'm doing here. Because I've done a lot of research on Pelosi. Makes me angry. I was thinking of what I was really trying to think of is Senator Feinstein of California, both from San Francisco. That's where I got confused. But Senator Feinstein, let me just show an example. She voted for the Bush tax cuts. She voted for the Iraq War. What kind of Democrat is that? You try to tell me what kind of Democrat that is? I don't know if she voted for the Trump tax cuts because she knew more people were watching her.
Yeah.
She might have been forced to vote against that, but I guarantee you. And she's taken that. I've heard interesting stories of people about her campaign where they've tried to go because a lot of the progressive campaigns that are fighting against her in the primary are they're relying heavily on volunteers on the ground to get their message out. They don't have the money she has. But then I found out that to find her website for this particular election year, you have to go like 10 pages into Google, and even there, you can't find a place to volunteer for her. She's just hoping she can just buy the election. That's not going to work this time. I think she's going to be primaried personally. I don't think she can stand a primary, even though she's been in the Senate since '93. She's the Democrat that I think, but Pelosi too. She is, I think the Progressive Caucus, people like Keith Ellis and Bernie Sanders. I think we need these kind of people to take over the party, because if you poll the base on public polls, they're much more in line with Sanders and Ellison. Even the American people. I mean, if you look at Medicare for all, minimum wage, drug reform, pretty much they align with the Progressive Caucus of the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. But most of the party, which is establishment, and which is a lot of the people, a lot of the big names in the Democratic Party, they take Cory Booker is a great example of this. He takes a lot of money from pharmaceutical industries, which means he is going to try to probably fight against Medicare for all, which should be the number one Democratic proposal.
Yeah.
He's going to fight against that, and he fought against Bernie Sanders' drug importation bill, so Medicare and Medicaid could buy drugs cheaper.
Interesting.
The drug lobbyists fought so Medicare and Medicaid can't negotiate cheaper drug prices. Mm-hmm. So that adds burden on the consumers and on the taxpayers. We're paying into those systems, which is great. I don't mind paying into the systems. I think that's good for the common good. But I'd like to see my tax dollars more effectively used. So if we can get the same drugs at much cheaper prices, like they do in Canada, they negotiate drug prices, and the government spends much less on healthcare, even though, at least on that particular, but I think they spend less on healthcare than we do, and they have national single payer. Mm-hmm. I think in terms of GDP even, so it's like they spend less than we do, not just on absolute terms, but I think on GDP. In terms of GDP, I think we have to look at. I think nationalizing healthcare will ultimately save money, because then you have less people going into the ER with massive problems, because they're more likely to go into the doctor when they need help, at the first sign of trouble. Then they have so many things wrong, they're about to die, and people wait now because they cannot afford medical bills. Yeah. Even going to the doctor could put someone in medical bill. Could put some people in debt. It should not do that. We're the only industrialized country where the idea of a medical bankruptcy is even ever heard of. Most other countries, you don't have to worry about it if you can pay. And like I know in Canada, which I think the system we'd have to go to, is they have the public, government healthcare insurance that everyone has, but then you can buy into a private system if you need if you would like to have, additional coverage. But I think we'd have to heavily regulate that. We do not regulate healthcare enough. So, we get the national system, then, we may maybe allow people to buy into private insurance. But the way it's set up right now, private insurance is only have to make money. We'd have to make sure that they do care about the people.
Okay. Interesting. Why am I always forgetting questions that I was going to ask? Oh, here we go. This is what I was going to say. What is your plan in terms of getting Republican Kansas voters to not only turning themselves on to the Kansas Democratic Party, but voting for Democrats?
I think one thing that because you have to get out there. And most of the events that have been held by the Democratic Party, mostly Democrats come. Yeah. So right now we're in the primary stage where you're just trying to get through to Democratic voters. The party isn't really thinking about Republican voters, although some of the candidates are making that, really part of a platform. But really my whole thing is I've looked at the polls, and the ideas that I support are supportive by at least a good, I know marijuana, Medicare for all do have some sizable minority support from Republicans nationwide. Mm-hmm. So I think we can draw on that. We can say, okay, Democrats, I know most Democrats are for this, and we can get some Republicans for this if we just present our ideas. A lot of Republicans are turned off from the Democratic Party just nationwide because they see it as a party that's fighting for, SJWs who are protesting everything. Yeah. And the party who is, and who's out of touch. But if we show, no, we care about you, we're going to do these things that will objectively help the majority of Kansans and the majority of Americans, I think that will draw people into the Kansas Democratic Party and the National Democratic Party. But we have to change leadership at the national level. We cannot continue with these people who have been in power too long. Mm-hmm. Some people would say that about Bernie Sanders, but Bernie Sanders really hasn't been in power. He's been in the Senate since 06, mm-hmm. 07, but how many, he's never been majority leader. He's never been in the ranking part of the party. He's never been up there. I think he's been chairs of committees, but never in terms of actually having a leadership role within the party. That means anything. I know they gave him some title that meant nothing. After the election. But I think if we, I'm saying make him speaker. No, make him majority leader. He's in the Senate. Make him majority leader in the next session. When the Democrats take the Senate, make Sanders majority leader. I know that is an outrageous statement, but if you want people to actually take the Democratic Party seriously, that's what you need to have to do. And then in the House of Representatives, I would say probably put someone like Keith Ellison as speaker, or someone like him, a progressive. I think if you do that, the Democratic base will be more likely to turn out for Democrats, and the Republican base will see, okay, this isn't the old party that it was 5 years ago. This is the party that's going to fight for me. They might be more in tune to at least listening to Democratic ideas.
Interesting. Okay. Let's see. What are some tips that you would have in order to get this younger generation? I mean, if you look in this library, it's a Saturday, but this is a university where we're supposed to work for our degrees. No one even wants to come in and do their schoolwork. How are we supposed to get these kids politically involved?
I think, I may sound like a broken record here, but I'm only going to say just offer the ideas that have shown popular. And honestly, I think, especially with young people, showing that politics isn't for old white men. I think that is a great thing, because if you show people that, okay, we've got people of all races, all genders, and all ages running for office, I think that will show people, okay, this isn't what I thought politics was. It's fighting for people, and it's for people of, candidates are all different types of people. And I think if we get more types of people running, I think that'll only help with that.
Okay.
Because if people see someone like them running, people, someone young sees someone like me running, like, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Or you see more women running, which I think will help with that, because women see, okay, there's going to be a voice that understands me in Washington or in Topeka. And I think, so you see more of that, I think you will see more engagement in politics. And we've seen that in the past.
What is in store for you after this election? Say you we'll play out both scenarios. You are elected governor. What's going to happen after that? And what's going to happen if you don't? Because you're 17. So what do you want to do with politics for the rest of your life?
Well, I definitely want to become involved. I will say this I'm not going to, beat around the bush like some politicians will. I'm not really a politician, but, sometimes I'll say, I'm not sure if I'm going to run. I know I'm going to run for some office again in the future, regardless of how this turns out.
Yeah.
Whether it's U.S. Congress, whether it's state legislature, county commissioner, who knows? But definitely will be running for office in the future, and I'll just wait to see what I think the best opportunity to serve the people is. But in terms of just more in general, I'm going to go to college, either after my term's up or starting next year, next calendar year, yes. So, I'm looking at that, I'm not even sure I'm going to go into politics as my career. I'm very interested in going into education, teaching school. That is, I just want to go in to help people and whatever I think is the best way to do that. And so I'm still thinking about how I want to do that. And I very well may not decide for a while yet.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good answer. Let's see. Let me check the time. 48 minutes. Are there any other last minute things you want to say, or... I feel like we've wrapped this up pretty nicely. You explained your policy prescriptions. You've shared some interesting stories since running, talked about the balance between being a student and also owning your own or having a campaign, and we kind of touched base on Wichita as a whole. So I think we wrapped that up nicely, unless there's any last moment things you want to mention.
No, I think I'm good.
All right, folks. There you have it. Thank you for tuning in to this special episode of the KPC podcast. I'm Karsan Turner, and we will catch you in the next episode.